We have these. I'm really excited about the next set of speakers. We have kind of two smaller talks and then a short conversation between some amazing people, some of whom are coming out of the competitive game scene, and then David Kanaga, who's working in very experimental and kind of beautiful exploratory ways, and so in order to facilitate that, I'm going to turn it over to a colleague of mine from the NYU Game Center and one of the people who teach there, who's going to introduce our speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, Robert Yang.
Hi, I'm Robert. I'm part-time faculty at Game Center. And it's my honor to present to you a really great doubleheader of talks for this next hour. The first talk is Community Level Design for CSGO. And that's presented by Shawn Snelling and Sal Volcano Garozzo. And I'll introduce them later. And then the second talk is by David Kanaga. And that's called Instrumental Oikos Kaarimas. Is that the Japanese? And the first one's a really concrete deep dive into like technical practice, and then the second one is super theoretical. And we really like that contrast here at this conference. So hope you really enjoy it. So let me introduce our speakers right now. Sal, Volcano Garozzo, and Shawn. They're really great collaborators, and I got really turned on to them. That came out wrong. I was interested by their professional work as level designers on CSGO. There's a map called DE Cache, and I actually got all these statistics to just tell you like how great this map is. It's been played for more than 12,000 hours a day, 600,000 rounds per day. That's so many numbers. DE Cache was also map 2 in the grand final of the biggest CSGO tournament. There were 250,000 viewers for this. They're kind of a big deal. It's kind of basically what I want to say. So please give a big round of applause for Shawn and Sal.
All right, how's everybody doing? Our talk's going to be about emphasizing player skill and strategic choices in CSGO level design. Just a little intro. We're community level designers, and between the two of us, we have a combined 5 levels that are included in Valve's CSGO. Yep. Yeah. Is that better? Yeah. I actually have a long history of playing Counter-Strike professionally, which helps me design levels for it. I get some insight into how the players approach the map, and I'm able to make things that I think that they would like. And Shawn has over a decade of experience making levels for all sorts of games. Here you can actually see me playing at some of these tournaments and some of Shawn's work alongside of it. And the first thing I want to talk about is just letting player skill shine through via strategic depth in your level design. That's the #1 goal that you want to do as a level designer, making community competitive maps for CS. Just a show of hands, how many of you have actually played Counter-Strike here? So basically everybody. So I guess I can breeze through this slide a little bit. Most of you know this. It's a team-based first-person shooter. It's 5-on-5. You play 2 halves. You start as counter-terrorists, which are CTs, and that's the defense, or terrorists, which are known as Ts. That's offense. You play 15 rounds each half, so you get to play both offense and defense. And whoever gets to 16 rounds first wins. And that's oversimplifying it a little bit if you've played the game, but we'll leave it at that. And it's the most popular PC-based FPS in esports currently. So here's an overview of DE Cache. Robert gave a good introduction to what Cache is. So to date, it's the most successful map that Shawn and I have created. And I think it's because it allows for a wide variety of playstyles to be successful, and it's well balanced between the offense and defense. You could expect, either team will get about 8 or 7 rounds. It's very balanced. You don't have landslides like 14-1 scores at the end of the half. So to create a good level, you have to understand how teams approach playing a map. So you can see a line dividing the center of cache. On the left is where the CTs control the territory. On the right is where Ts control territory. Basically, CTs have 5 players. They have to defend 2 bomb sites. So they'll usually put 2 people in each bomb site and 1 guy in the middle. Or they might mix it up and do 1 in each bomb site and 3 in the middle, just to keep the opponent guessing and to try to use the best strategy that they think would counter what the opposition is running. And on the flip side, the offense, they run what's called the default. And that basically just means spreading your 5 guys across the map at those 4 choke points there. I think 4 choke points is the ideal for levels. If you look at Dust 2, Inferno, all these maps also follow the same trend here with the dividing line and 4 choke points. So what you do, you have your 5 people, and between them you put like 1 guy at each of these, and the 5th guy kind of floats around. Usually on cache it's in the middle because that's where the most action takes place. And what their goal is to just hold map control, make sure that the CTs aren't getting aggressive and trying to gain extra information that you don't want them to have. And you do this for about the first 30 seconds of a round before executing your actual strategy. You're trying to feel out the opponent, seeing where they're weak, and you're making these calls to the in-game leader of your team, and he has to process all of this information and keep a mental image of what the setup is. So this works pretty well in cache. It's a very easy map for teams to learn and to play. It's important to note, if you're going to make maps for Counter-Strike, that it's a punishing game. Don't make it more punishing for the players by having like 1,000 boxes to hide behind in each bomb site. If you're caught looking the wrong way, you're basically dead in this game. Even if you're looking at your opponent, you're probably still dead. So too many areas of danger at once is a bad thing, for sure. I would say too much cover is definitely worse than too little cover in this game. And how you approach that if you're trying to attack a bomb site is you divide and conquer. You'll try to isolate each angle. You'll peek it very slowly and methodically, and then you move on to the next and so forth. And so here's a picture of bomb site A in cache, and you could see it's a pretty simple bomb site. You have a red shipping container, some missiles in the back, and that's it. There's 6 common spots. Sounds pretty easy that, just go in there. There's only 6 spots to deal with. It shouldn't be that big of a deal, but actually it's really tough. You can use some things like smoke grenades to cover 1/2, and then you only have to worry about the other portion. But again, easier said than done. If you look at this, you'll see where the red lines intersect with each other. That's called the crossfire, and that's the ideal thing when you're trying to set up as a counter-terrorist. You want to set up crossfires as much as you can, because that means you have 2 guns to their 1 if you do it properly. You'll want to create your bomb sites with this in mind. You want to have not that much cover, but you do want to have opportunities for crossfires. So you see in that upper corner there were those 3 spots. Those are all very complementary spots to each other, and they allow you to run these crossfires. Yeah, and that's basically that. Just make sure you keep that in mind. The good thing about crossfires is it encourages communication and teamwork instead of just mindlessly hiding behind one of the 15 boxes in a bomb site, which nobody finds that fun. I wanted to talk about verticality in Counter-Strike. In level design, you're told verticality is awesome. Make sure you have it. But in Counter-Strike, it's kind of different because since the game is so punishing, you should use it sparingly compared to other shooters because it's so powerful. Just being elevated slightly gives you a big advantage in a battle. So again, just use it sparingly. You don't want to create a flat map. That's not what I'm saying, but just be cautious when you do use it. And also in Counter-Strike, players use very low mouse sensitivities. I didn't bring my mouse pad, but I should have. It's about 1.5 feet wide, and I use every inch of it to turn. So you just have to keep in mind your demographic when you're creating levels for them. But CS does allow verticality to be used in some unique ways that a lot of other games don't have, so I'm going to cover that. One way is stacking and boosting. So in CS, if your teammate crouches, you could actually jump on top of him, and you can see over things that you wouldn't normally be able to see. So if there's a, like a low gate that you can't normally see over, you can get on your teammate's head and look over it and kill people on the other side. So that's one interesting way you could use verticality in your levels. The other is actually, once you're on top of your teammate's head, you can jump again and get to something higher than you would normally be able to. Which is really cool because that encourages some planning, communication, and teamwork. You gotta tell your buddy, get over here, we're gonna do that boost, and you have to make sure it's safe to do it because you're really exposed when you have two guys just like kind of crouching and jumping on top of each other. So here's an exaggerated example of stacking. This is a famous picture from Counter-Strike 1.5. You can't do this in Counter-Strike Go. They patched it out. You can only use 2 people now in a stack. Fortunately or unfortunately, I'm not sure which one. So I wanted to show kind of the culmination of everything I've been talking about so far. That spot up there where the arrow is, you can only get to it by boosting on your teammate's head. And this happened at a tournament about a month ago by a player named Shroud, where he kept his team in a game by having a insanely clutch play by using that boost position. So we're going to watch a video clip here. So I think that highlights a lot of points that I've been talking about. First, you can see Counter-Strike's a punishing game. Some dude with a pistol just killed 3 people with AK-47s, and they didn't even fire a shot at him. So if you're looking the wrong way, you're probably dead. So that spot, though, we balanced it by there's only like one spot like that on the whole map, and it requires a boost. You can't litter spots like that all over the map because it just won't work. It's too much for players to reasonably be able to check as they're attacking a bomb site. The next thing I want to talk about are trick jumps, which these are really cool because, well, first what a trick jump is, you manipulate your movement midair, you take advantage of the engine to gain a few extra units that you travel, and you can include these in your map, like places that are slightly longer than a default jump, and skilled players are able to get to these further locations, and they can showcase their skill by being rewarded and getting to locations they shouldn't normally be able to get to. You don't want them to be too powerful because that is kind of unfair, and they shouldn't be exclusive. You should be able to do them by just boosting on your teammate's head. It makes it fair for everybody. And they're most effective in moderation. With Cash, we have one famous trick jump on the map, and it's really cool to see because when you have a trick jump, people will start making content. Like there's tons of YouTube videos of people explaining how do you do the jump. They have videos where they do the jump successfully, and it's just something that people are proud of, and it's a skill that they enjoy practicing, and just gives some extra depth to the level. So here's a picture of that jump I'm talking about. So you see 3 CTs, that kind of highlights the 3 phases of the jump. You start on that the overhang of the garage, then you jump to the next spot, and then to the next spot. And it's not easy to do. It's time consuming, it's dangerous, it's the most highly action area of the map. There's tons of gunfights here. So if you're going to try to do this, I guess good luck is all I can say. But if you land it, you can get on top of that roof and flank behind enemy lines. So it is really powerful. And this kind of just shows you the process that I was talking about. And even the best players who can do it, they still don't do it in matches because it's pretty risky. But you do see it every now and then, and it's awesome to see. The next topic is wall banging, which is basically just a silly way of saying shooting through walls. I don't know why they named it that, but that's what our community has decided to call it. So that's based on the caliber of weapon you're using, the surface you're shooting through, and how thick that surface is. So if you have an AK-47 and you're shooting a tiny wooden board, your bullets are going to go through the other side. And this is cool because it allows players to demonstrate their knowledge of the map, and they feel pretty cool and pretty clever when they kill somebody through walls. If you guys have played, you probably know that feeling. And And it's a good way as level designers to counter powerful defensive positions. You can have, like wooden planks. I'm going to show you on the next slide what I'm talking about. And again, it's most effective in moderation. So here is a map that Shawn and I created, DE Crown, and you can see these double doors. It's pretty scary to go through them. So what we did is we hollowed out the walls on the side and put a wooden board between it. And you can shoot those boards and kill anybody on the other side. And it's just another way for players to kind of exhibit their skill. And it's more than just twitch shooting. It's some mental thinking to do something like that in a high pressure situation. And then the last topic I wanted to go over is the bomb planting zones. Bomb planting is the most important objective in CS. It's the only objective, really. And extra thought here can go a long way. So basically how designers view bomb planting is there's usually your safe spot, and the trade-off with that is you can't defend it from many locations, but at least you can plant the bomb and work on winning the round after that. Or you can have a risky bomb plant, and if it's risky, that means you could cover it from more locations, so it's advantageous if you can do it. And this allows for interesting tactics. I'm going to show you guys some concrete examples of that as well. So this is an overview of bomb site A on cache. This one here is it's very non-controversial. This is the safe plant. Everybody does this one on cache. It's not the best plant though, but it's the safest. It requires the least coordination, the least cover from your team. But once CT start retaking the bomb site, they probably will be able to defuse the bomb there. This one's a better bomb plant. It's more out in the open. You're exposed from a bunch of different angles as you're planting, but the main benefit is that main area is where the terrorists attack from. So they don't even, once the bomb's planted, they don't even have to leave where they came from. It's completely covered. It's an enclosed room. They have full control of it, and they could see the bomb. It makes defusing the bomb very difficult. So you don't want to let people plant there. So there's trade-offs with these things. And the last one I want to show you is the most unique one on the map. It's on the far side here, and if you look at where the circle is, that's middle, and not shown on the screen to the right is basically the CT spawn. So you have to be pretty insane to plant here, right? Because that's where CTs are playing. That's where they come from. So what teams actually do is they just throw a ton of smoke grenades where that blue arrow is, send the bomb carrier into the smoke, and he just plants in there. And they can't even see him. Once the smoke clears, then they have a good plant, and they probably will win the round. And that was it for my part of the talk. And Shawn, here you go.
So hi guys, my name is Shawn, and I just want to talk to you about where form meets function in Counter-Strike Go level design. So what does that mean? Basically, it's very important as designers, level designers, game designers, that the form of what we present to players actually matches the function of what they need and expect from us on the design side of things. So just to tell you a little bit about myself personally, I'd say I'm a more like artistically minded level designer, in the sense that I think I could be like an environment artist and a level designer. So the perks of that, you know, if you can create a level that looks really good, obviously that's going to increase the odds of the level being included in like a Valve operation or included, you know, in the game officially. But I would say the downside for me, and one of the reasons I so appreciate working with Sal, is that it can be very easy to get carried away with the art side of things and sort of lose track of, again, what players need and expect on the design side of things. So like I said, you know, Sal, his 15 years of experience like playing Counter-Strike professionally and being a level designer also, it really helps me to stay grounded, and as an artist, we sort of get the best of both worlds. You know, I'm able to take some things that I'm excited about on the art side, and then, you know, Sal and I can talk about, well, you know, players are still going to need this on the most basic fundamental level, and I don't know as much about Counter-Strike, so that information is super useful to me. And what that process actually ends up looking like is a compromise process. So, every design decision matters in Counter-Strike. Rewarding player skill. We saw that clip. We saw how, the player hesitated for a moment. They allowed the other players to get out in front of him before he attacked. And just micro decisions like that, that's how deep this game goes. So, every design decision has to consider those types of things. And every aesthetic decision that I make or that Sal makes and just level designers for CSGO in general, every aesthetic decision ends up being a design decision that matters. So in CSGO, the line between art direction and level design it's very heavily blurred. So like I said, going back to that compromise process that goes on, what does that actually look like? So this is a work in progress of Cache that I probably put together in a month or so. I wanted to capture a look and a feeling for players of an old, broken down Soviet warehouse, and I think this does a decent job of that. You see the broken, the dead leaves on the ground, and there's just a death feeling to it. It's almost like heavy metal or something like that. So, the broken down car, the dead tree, but it's almost doing that too well, and it's something that Sal pointed out. Players play these maps 12,000 hours a day every day for years. So the idea that you're going to put them in this kind of an environment, in this kind of a mindset, it's not really ideal, just because players want to be happy, just like anybody else. Yeah. So they don't want to be depressed, basically, and be a part of a depressing environment, even if it's realistic or, aesthetic in a stylish kind of way. So, Sal just said, listen, this environment is visually noisy, so it's going to be hard to spot players. That's bad design, first of all. And yeah, it's just a little bit too depressing. So we worked through it using a lot of photographic reference, using a lot of just basic sort of color principles, and we came up with this. I think the first thing you notice is that it does still sort of look like a Soviet factory, but it's not so depressing. And that's important, really important. You've got some grass, you've got some brighter, more primary colors. It's something that you can sort of latch onto. And speaking of latching onto, this is a map we may know. Are you guys familiar with Dust 2? Okay, so this is the top dog in Counter-Strike. If you want to talk about Counter-Strike level design, it's almost pointless to talk about any other map than this. So this is a map made by a guy named Dave Johnson in 1.6, so the years and years and years ago. And it's been around, and obviously it's not going anywhere. So this is the top dog in Counter-Strike. This is something that I look at every day and I think about, and I say, well, that map is doing so well, and I want to defeat it. I want to make something that's better, more popular, that will withstand the test of time. Not really possible, but. So it's easily the most played map in Counter-Strike history. We worked on Cache. I'd say Dust 2 probably daily gets 3 or 4 times as much play, and Cache gets a lot of play. So it's got a memorable theme. It's clean feeling and highly readable in terms of the visual presentation. It's got a flawless layout. I have so much respect for this map. It is the Counter-Strike map. And just to recap the idea of readability, what that actually means, this is a chart from Valve sort of describing the player silhouettes on the Team Fortress 2 character models. So you can see how each character model looks different. It's sort of the same idea in Counter-Strike. The counter-terrorist model looks different just on the silhouette level than the terrorist model. So what that does is it creates the ability to easily distinguish players against the background, in this case the environment of our levels. And so obviously, this color scheme is going to work pretty well. This is the ideal one, but it's not really plausible. But it is one key to Dust 2's enduring success. This is not a cherry-picked image of Dust 2 in any way. This is pretty much the authentic experience of what the level is going to look like. And you can see it just trends, it's so desaturated and so like almost milky, and if a player is walking on that environment, you're going to be able to see them. So there's a lot of wisdom in minimalism, in design in general, but especially with Dust 2, the way it does it is so perfect. It's extremely simple. The geometry is very digestible. The desaturated textures, which trend towards white, make it so easy to see players against them. And the contrast that you actually do observe here, I'll just go back so you can observe the contrast. It's at the exits of the pathing on the level. So the players move through the level in a very naturalistic way. And that makes it an uphill battle for other levels to try and compete with a level like Dust 2. But there are hidden perks to creating readable environments beyond just, oh, I can see the other people easier. Wow, that's nice. You know, it's a psychological thing. It improves the player experience on such a fundamental level that it means that instead of fighting other players and the level, that a well-designed level just fades into the background and it allows player interactions to come right to the forefront. And well-designed levels can actually enhance the player experience because they take advantage of subtle psychological principles rather than trying to be in your face with the style. So I had a personal experience with this on deathmatch mode. Dust 2 being so ubiquitous, almost all the deathmatch, I mean, I should tell you a little bit about what deathmatch actually ends up being. It's not what Sal described as the main Counter-Strike mode. Deathmatch, it just ends up being a way to practice your mechanical aim skill. And so people who want to take a break from the real game and just improve their mechanical aim skill will play some deathmatch. And obviously the default map of Counter-Strike being Dust 2, for the practical purposes, it means all the deathmatch maps end up being Dust 2. But I played one the other day on Nuke, and Nuke is not as good of a map as Dust 2, and I was getting frustrated. And I just said to myself, I want to be playing Dust 2. I don't want to be playing Nuke right now on deathmatch mode. So other maps try to break the rules. Dust 2 just elegantly merges form with function. It accepts as a premise that what players really crave is interaction with other players. It merges their demands for readability with a believably executed environment. And this is what I think the actual consequences of this simple step of improving readability are. You reduce player cognitive dissonance, which creates a positive association in the player's mind between your level and their fun. It demonstrates value to the player by doing that, which is going to improve player retention on your levels, which can have the direct consequence of making your level more popular than other levels. So is there actually any room to compete with Dust 2? It's hard. You have to try to create even higher levels of player evaluation. And so the way to do that I've found as sort of an aesthetically minded level designer is just focus on the room for improvement in Dust 2. You know, minimalism can be plain, sort of, okay, this is an authentic picture of like a broken down Middle Eastern place. It just doesn't really, it doesn't inspire the imagination perhaps. Or it can be stylish. And this is a level I just released not that long ago, I think Wednesday or Tuesday or something. It was included in a Valve operation. I think it's doing pretty well. So yeah, so obviously my goal with this was using photographic references in Japan and things like that, like just bring the style forward with the minimalism and just, you know, don't be a dusty Middle Eastern level, you know, have some flair, you know. So I think this is the holy grail for level designers in CSGO. You have an aesthetic blend of form with function to create like a purity of experience, high readability matched with an artistic vision. So there is a problem. And that's that desaturated environments, like super white, like just, you know, not too many colors, they create a very false impression. And it's sort of artificial. But the solution to that is I just said, I'm going to embrace that. And I'm going to match the form of the level I'm going to create with the function of a highly readable level. And it's going to include some of the flaws of that. And the way I decided to do that was to have like a high-tech, inherently artificial sort of laboratory environment. And so this is what that ends up looking like. That's Season. This is the bomb site on Season. So as you can see, it doesn't necessarily look real, but I do think it's aesthetic, and I do think the readability is pretty high because, again, it's very, very white. Yes. So It's easy to see player models, no doubt. I think aesthetic minimalism tends to work for CSGO. It's not that you can't do anything else, it's just very effective. So here you see other examples in other games. TF2, Mirror's Edge, which ends up looking like Season a lot, which is not a coincidence. Deus Ex Human Revolution is so similar ideas. So other advantages of extremely effective art design is that the details of your level, which you actually pursue, the few details can be more than just details. Because there are not so many of them, they can be more purposeful and deliberate. So an example is skyboxes. They're not just decoration, they're design. You see that radio tower in the background, and maybe it will be in just a moment clear why that's there. So effective skyboxes evoke design truths. They're out of the way, they're magnified by readability within the level itself, they enhance the level fiction, and by doing that they enhance the gameplay. Now Counter-Strike Go definitely presents entirely new opportunities for skybox design. Here you can see what we did with Cache. It's got the readability of the fences and sort of the white concrete there, but it's also enhancing the level fiction because that's Chernobyl in real life. And so you can see the resemblances there. This is a Valve map called Overpass. It's got the radio tower there. And this came out before Season, so maybe the logic is following a little bit. This is another image of Season just to start wrapping things up here. It's got Mount Fuji in the background. Season's based in Japan. Now we're starting to bring the level fiction into the experience of the players without harming the readability. And so the radio towers, what does that do for players? When you see a radio tower up in the skybox, it can give you a visual landmark of where you can throw smoke grenades, and it happens on this level that the tower is placed in such a way that you can throw smoke grenades using the tower and the direction there to block off elements of the bomb site, help your players, help your teammates, be better professional players, and players see value in that. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Sal and Shawn. Next, while David is getting set up, I guess I'll introduce him real quick. So come get set up. David Kanaga is a music theorist, game formalist, an amateur composer based in Oakland. He has worked professionally on video games, including Proteus, Dyad, and Panoramical, the forthcoming Panoramical, and has translated and edited a new edition of, oh dear, Huvanistag Ludistag's new fractal play spaces. That's a mouthful. And he also gave a really great talk at last GDC. If you haven't seen it, you need to check it out. It was an amazing talk last GDC. And David is here to talk about, again, instrumental oikos ka arimasu. I didn't butcher that, right? That was okay?
Yeah,
okay.
that's good.
Thanks. Are you ready?
Sure. Yeah, I think I am.
Okay, I guess give it up for David Kanaga.
So, thanks for watching. Thanks, Robert. This is the talk from GDC that I gave. This is sort of a companion piece to that. This was a wet talk, and I'm going to give a dry talk today because this had a lot of music going on, and I didn't really have much to say over it. But I'm going to just talk. I might set some music going because I need to go to the bathroom to give me an excuse to go to the bathroom at some point. Because I've got a video that I could play as well. So I've got a lot of different titles for this. Instrumental Oikos is one. Here's another title. Neolib Dream Machines. Now this is, some of you know about another title that's similar to that, but this is the more appropriate title. This is Ted Nelson, Computer Lib Dream Machines, was about the hypertext and getting excited about that. Neolib, we'll talk about more in a moment, many moments. Instrumental Oikos, ludic ecologonomy. Here is our etymological chart of the concepts that are the central concepts of the talk. We know the word ludic means play or game, and it's all liquefied because that's a symbol of playing, because when you play something, you liquefy it. Ecology and economy, I've combined those into ecologonomy, which is not a word, as the software's told me. Thank you. So ecology and economy, they both have the same Greek word, oikos. Sorry, I'm sick and tired, so I've got stumbling too. Oikos means house. Economy means management of the household. Ecology means what? Something else. Study of the household. So we might think that ecology means like study of the unmanaged aspects of the household. And I'm going to propose that these are the rightful grounding sciences of a theory of games. And we know that game theory lays claim to that, and that's in economic science. The John von Neumann book, A Theory of Games and Economic Behavior. Economic book. We talk about game theory and we say, oh, okay, it's economics. But economics requires ecology. Economics is always dealing with resources that are ecological. This is stuff that we've been hearing a lot about this year on a grand scale. This is happening at all scales, from above and below. Okay, so Mr. Frank Lance at GDC, he gave a nice, another totalizing claim about games, and I like these. He says, games are the aesthetic form of instrumental reason, and I like this. But I want us to be wary of thinking that instrumental reason is a monism, that it's a one unit thing. I think it's a dualism. Instrumental reason splits along these lines: ecological, economical, musical, mathematical, irrational, rational, forces and rules, affordances, allowances. These are all kind of opposed to each other, but they're not. They're dialectical relationships. They flow into each other and they transform each other. For instance, economy requiring an ecology for its resources. We require food if we want to do good work. Music requires mathematics. You got to count 1, 2, 3, 4. Mathematics requires a sense of musicality. I think that the equality operator, I would characterize that as a musical thing, not a mathematical thing. And mathematical things in this system are the aspect of problem solving in mathematics. And the aspect of harmony is a musical quality. That's why I say that the equality operator, excuse me, the equality operator is a musical thing because it balances, it harmonizes something, just like singing something. Likewise, rational, irrational. We say, they're opposed to each other. No, they're not. They're constantly intertwined with one another. If we think about, and I'm not a mathematician, so, and also feel free to interrupt at any point and ask questions if I'm saying something stupid or if I am saying something confusing, and this might be stupid. But real number line, we got a line from 0 to 1, so small section of the real number line. We want to get all the rational numbers. How do we do that? We divide 0, we divide that line into 2. Now we got 2 halves. And then we keep dividing that in again and again. Divide all those bits. Divide. And eventually we get the infinitesimal numbers that we know from calculus. And these are all infinitely small numbers, but they're still rational numbers. In between each of these infinitesimally small numbers, there are infinitely many irrational numbers. Is that true? I think it is. I don't know. Call me out on it if it's... oh no, it's my water. Water. Is this it? Yeah. So I think it's the same thing. So basically, at any point in a rational number, there's an opportunity to sort of swerve away and swerve into the irrational, which is always an adjacent possible state. And I think this is true in games too. We have a lot of rational games that say do this, do that, and you can be rational about it and say, okay, I'm going to do this and do that, and I'm going to do it damn well. Or you can be irrational about it and you say, I'd rather do something else. And I'm interested in that. Forces and rules, this is maybe the most commonsensical dyad in the dualism here. And excuse me. So, we talk about mechanics in games, right? And we say, what's the game's mechanics? What do they do? Blah, blah, blah. And that concept, it seems to me, is is used because of Newton's mechanics. We know that the physical universe follows Newton's mechanics. Actually, we know that the physical universe does not follow Newton's mechanics because of a variety of things in the last 100 years, or 100 plus. But we talk about a game's mechanics. What was Newton talking about when he talked about his mechanics? Was he talking about forces? Was he talking about rules? Well, he was kind of talking about both of them. So if Newton's talking about gravity and he's talking about this bottle falling, there's two meanings to that mechanic as I see it. And one of them is the rule that we use to describe the bottle falling, which I do not know, but if you've taken physics, you know it. The other is the force of the bottle falling itself, which does not correspond, or it corresponds to the rule, it harmonizes with the rule, but it's a totally different thing. And Newton called these forces occult forces. He thought they were forever unknowable. And of course Newton got it wrong, and of course now we got a different image of nature, which has probably got it wrong too. Okay, here's another slide. We talk about lenses in game design sometimes, and I have a little metaphor here that this theory is also a lens, but it's an eyeball lens. It's not a pair of eyeglasses. This is what I mean when I'm saying that I think that these concepts ground the theory. This is what I think right now. I might be wrong, but I think I'm talking about eyeball lenses. That these are concepts that you don't remove and switch for another pair of glasses. These are you can only remove them with surgeries here. So there's a paragraph there about that. And the eyeglasses are mechanistic. You can describe the optics probably in a similar way to Newton's optics, but the eyeball is organic, and that's something else. And we want to. So I had that pointed to the talk that I gave at GDC. It's called Music, Object, Substance, Organism, and I think we should be holding this idea of a organism or organic ideas as a important concept to try to work with. Okay, so what's the goal of this? I want to describe a broad and inclusive formalism, which is this is a stupid font, which encourages experimentation rather than conservatism. I think a lot of times we hear in the last couple of years we've heard about formalism versus zinesterism or formalism versus anti-formalism, and with the idea being that the anti-formalists are trying to push things and the formalists are trying to keep things value existing things, and that's a good project too. I don't say conservatism as like that's totally bad. Conserving some things is very important. But this is silly. Formalism traditionally, in the Soviet Union, the formalist composers like Shostakovich would sometimes get little whippings from the bureaucracy because they were too formalist. And there's formalist painters, Kandinsky, Paul Klee, folks at the Bauhaus was like a formalist project, and these are all things that are pushing things. So I think it's very important that formalism be reclaimed as something that pushes and that doesn't defend existing territory, but pushes outwards. And that's why I say it's broad and inclusive. Anything that we talk about here needs to be regarded as a formal space, as a game. I'd be comfortable calling all these things games. Or we can say the word play space if we want to have that be the formal thing, and a game is a certain, yeah. That's the goal. Did I? Well, all right, sorry. You got it, yeah. Good. All right. Yeah, remember, you could all interrupt like this, all right. Okay, so some hints for our formalisms. We want our formalism to be so broad that it's not just the video games that we're talking about, but it's kind of everything, Like this situation is a game that I'm playing pretty hard right now. I'm trying to do something. I'm trying to do something, and you guys are all sitting there. And again, you can say things if you'd like, but you're choosing not to. Or to choose. So this is a natural situation, and this should be describable within a formal theory of games. So here are some books that deal with the concept of possibility spaces, which everyone I think knows is a central formal concept related to games. Well, it turns out there's a lot of people in other sciences who are then maybe this is known too, but who are into this concept. Stuart Kaufman, a biologist who's done a lot of work on the origins of life. He has a fascinating concept about the adjacent possible. He talks about life is always at the edge of chaos, A living creature is at the edge of chaos, trying to maximize its dimensionality. And what does that mean? It means it's trying to maximize its adjacent possible options. So what's an adjacent possible? This chair was an adjacent possible for me. I just picked it up. Microphone is sort of adjacent, but I'd have to go a little further away to get it. And how would it be a game if I picked it up and threw it at you and killed some of you? That'd be a sick win. Excuse me, no, I would feel very bad about that. Manuel de Landa is a philosopher who's done great work on these possibility spaces, and he's working in a tradition. There's another philosopher, Gilles Deleuze, that is very worth digging into, and I think is relevant to this, but he's sort of a hazy fella, and I'm not going to talk about him right now. But DeLanda is a very scientific guy, and he's trying to disprove all these old emergentist philosophies. The emergentism was popular in the early 20th century, late 19th century as well, but folks then like to talk about God as part of the emergent process. And DeLanda says, oh, no, we don't need to do that. I've got psychedelics now, so we don't need to talk about God. And Stuart Kaufman has this, he also said, oh, okay, I'm an atheist, but here's our way of re-enchanting nature. So there's all these, God, is that a good word or a bad word? I don't know. And John Conway, we know him from the Game of Life. He has another book called Numbers and Games, which is a book in hard math, which I don't really understand much of, but he's got a fascinating concept. He tries to describe a theory of games and then build the real number line from that theory of games, where every game is a number, and then he says, okay, so we're going to build numbers from games. And I think these are all, and there's a lot of other things too. I'm going to slam through some pages here because I know that this is recorded for the internet. And on the internet, you can just take a look at this, and you can pause it, and because if I had more time, I think a lot of these concepts, I understand some of it, don't understand a lot of it. Here's Investigations of Stuart Kaufman. And done. Thank you. Yeah, I worked hard on that one. Okay, what? So a lot of these concepts, a lot of the game that these folks are working with, they're not talking about games. They don't come to these conferences. They sit in their own houses and do maths and do science and all these things, and they're perfectly happy doing that because they've got a good history behind them, right? So if we talk about games, and I think if we talk about games with the proper sense of a historical grounding, then we would say, oh, okay, here are the concepts that games deal with. And we say, oh, play, life, purpose, leisure, work, tasks, completeness, blah, blah, blah. All these kinds of tasks here, space-time, freedom. Do we talk about freedom often? That's obviously a part of games. A huge central formal aspect of games. But it's such a huge topic that was like, oh, okay, we don't want to talk about that. I'd say something foolish. But so here's a list of what I believe are like the proper concepts that a study of games ought to deal with. And these are concepts that... Here's our video game prehistory. All right, so we know that video games are all computer software. Got it, yeah, no questions there. And computer software is composed of zeros and ones, or two different states that we label as zeros and ones. Has a deep history in formal logic. And formal logic, these folks are all dealing with those lists of concepts that I just put up there. I'm going to put them back. No, that's a movie. Yeah, these kinds of things. And so formal logicians are dealing with these concepts. And also, but a lot of these concepts are only dealt with by metaphysicians. And or we call them pseudoscientists these days. But in the old days, metaphysics and logic were like the same thing. So anyway, sorry. So here, a quick history. Aristotle's got his syllogisms. Socrates likes water. Socrates is a man. I don't know. I don't know how to complete that. This goes through the scholastic period in the medieval times, and folks create nice rationalistic definitions of God and so on. And meanwhile, the magicians, this is a huge part of the video game prehistory, because the magicians had these epic projects like the art of memory. People have memory palaces, and this was closely related to logic. For a rhetorician like myself coming up to talk in front of people, we'd say, okay, I need a memory palace to remember what I have to say. And so you'd have a mental image of different concepts, and you'd relate them. Either I'd say, okay, I'm going to store one concept by that pole, another concept by that pole, another concept by that pole, and so on. And this was related to this grand project called the Mathesis Universalis, which sought to create a universal mathematics, a universal language for everything, which I think a lot of people in tech culture think has been proudly achieved in the last 50 years with the advent of computation. I don't know. But anyway, Mathesis Universalis, this is something that Leibniz picked up. He had the early tendrils of formal logic with his propositional calculus, which is some interesting things, and he has two labyrinths, he called them. One of the continuum, which is when we zoomed into the real number line between 0 and 1, that's kind of a labyrinth of the continuum, finding those infinitely many numbers in between infinitely small numbers. That's some crazy stuff. He has a labyrinth of freedom also, which talks about the relationship, I believe, between freedom and causality, and how that relationship is so intertwined and braided that it's is one thing. Hegel, his innovation is using a paradox as a logical operator. A does not equal A, and so he's a pseudoscientist. But he was considered himself a very great scientist. And paradox is a logical operator. A does not equal A. This is the idea of dialectical movement. The bottle is in my hand. The bottle is on the ground. And so once we introduce time into the equation, I think it's difficult to avoid something of this sort too. And Gödel's going to bring back this idea. This is an old magician idea too. I don't know if you've heard of the Ouroboros, which is the snake that eats its own tail. And Hegel was an admirer of the magicians. And he describes the Ouroboros, and then Gödel comes back with that 100-some years later. After Hegel, now Hegel's doing this in the early 18th century, or early 19th century, sorry, and there's a big revolution in maths and logics that happens shortly afterwards, and which I think is interesting. I don't know if there's a relationship between this, where Hegel sort of disturbs the foundation of this logical thinking, but I think it's 10 or 20 years later, Boole, who we name our Boolean variables after, he created his own Boolean algebra, binary algebra, which I don't know. Frege was a mathematician who built on these concepts. Yeah, I don't know a lot of this stuff, but I'm trying to point where I say, oh, that looks interesting. I think that's a good place to go. Frege is another logician who created a concept script, building in some ways maybe from Boole's concepts. Boole sought to describe a language of thought, again, which a lot of us think, oh yeah, computers, language of thought. So Boole did that. Frege comes along and has a symbolic system to ease the description of these thoughts. Bertrand Russell and Alfred North Whitehead, they come along. They're interested in Boole and Frege, and they had both been working on projects kind of related to this Mathesis Universalis. Whitehead had been doing universal algebra, and Russell had been doing work on the foundations of mathematics, and they decided that their projects coincided. Whitehead was teaching Russell, and they used Frege's symbolic system so that they could write very complex things relatively quickly. I should have had a picture of this, actually. Maybe I'll look for that. But Bertrand Russell, Whitehead, Principia Mathematica, look for some pages of that. Let's even search for that. We got the internet here. This is what it looks like. Probably a lot of you have seen formal logic before, but there are just pages and pages of this kind of stuff. It's 3 volumes of like 400 pages each, but you just speed on. Ooh, oh, that's a great line there. What a fascinating. So Russell and Whitehead, huge moment. They try to reduce all of mathematical reasoning down to logical reasoning. And nowadays we think computers, oh yeah, computers are all about math, games are about math, blah, blah, blah. Well, are they about math or are they about logic? Are they about formal logic? Russell and Whitehead said, oh, that's the same thing. Then Gödel comes along and says, oh, that doesn't work. If you have a system that seeks to be complete like the Russell-Whitehead system, there will be an inconsistency in it. And there's a correlate idea to that I've forgotten. But Gödel's idea is famous from Hofstadter's strange loop idea, which is, again, the snake that eats its tail. Hofstadter doesn't talk about the snake that eats its tail because he's afraid of magicians. Or maybe he's not. I don't know why he doesn't talk about that. Maybe he does. I didn't finish the book. What's that? He talks about the Ouroboros? Sorry, my bad. Thank you. Thank you. Call me out on more of this stuff because I'm probably saying wrong things. Turing, of course, we know him, invented the... Oh, he's almost done. Dang! All right. One thing from Turing's famous paper on computable numbers is he talks about A machines, which he's mostly concerned with, which is automatic software, and he talks about C machines, which are choice machines, which wait for input from a user. And that's kind of proto-video game stuff. Am I actually done? Can I get returned to... A few more minutes, okay. So, so Kairimasu means return home. That's part of the title. I wish I had more time to talk about ecology and economy. The concept of affordance, which we know this microphone affords me picking it up because it's, it's not a tree. If it was or if it wasn't those poles, I couldn't pick it up. But the concept of affordance, where does that come from? Have people heard about this affordance, which a lot of people hear from Donald Norman's work in design. But where does he get the idea? He got the idea from James and Eleanor Gibson and their project, which was called ecological psychology. So there's an ecological aspect to the concept of affordance that is different from what I had said as allowance was the sort of contrast to that in the earlier slide. Allowance, where allowance is like an economical idea. Are you allowed to do this? I could go into this. The ecology economy thing might sound like nonsense because I didn't get to go into that much. But remember, economy it comes down to we got a household, which is a game or a magic circle. We all live in the magic circle house, and economy concerns management of that. Ecology concerns what's actually happening, which is a bunch of affordances tangling a bunch of things together. I feel like there's something very important that I want to say, but I forgot what it is. But that's basically it. Oh, I want to say one more thing about ecology. I didn't get to go to the neo-lib dream machines. Well, I'm going to just have to... That's the title of the neoliberalism. Look it up. Earlier today, Mr. Blow was talking about why does the Bay Bridge not get built? Why does the public works suck? Well, look up this concept, neoliberalism, because in the 40s, what was the highest marginal tax rate was over 90%. These days, rich folks pay in the teens or 30% of taxes. There's a project called neoliberalism, which, okay, this is the key thing. The history of video games throughout its entire life has developed in parallel to the history of this economic doctrine. And it's true. This question if you want. But Powell memo, so all the conservatives, they were saying, we got all these hippies at Berkeley and they're trying to collectivize. What are we going to do? We're businesses. We all like individuality. We can't collectivize. And the business said, well, what we should do is we should collectivize. And so the Powell memo is a memo that got all the businesses together and say, we're going to fight for business interests, and which is the free market freedom. Remember, neoliberalism means new freedom, and video games have always been new freedoms. That's why we're excited about them. And the Powell memo, fighting for business interests, fighting for free market, fighting for exciting competition, thrilling competitions, and the more kills the better. 1980, Reagan and Thatcher. There's the famous Reagan in the U.S., Thatcher in the U.K. They come along. That's a big, probably, I don't know what the good video game event for that year, but obviously, it's a video game a year. And okay, I think that's it. Except one more thing about ecology, which is that if we have this idea of home, I would have gone through these. Here, we can pause these on the internet too. The idea of home, magic circle, what's home? There's two homes that we all share, and I think this is really important, that everyone shares in common. And one of them is the Earth, which we all which we all share the actual Earth in common. And I'm not too optimistic about space travel because I think I'd get very depressed on Mars unless we got lots of nice plants and creatures around. And then the body, and we all have different bodies, but we all are embodied in the same way. And I could go off on that for a while, but it's time's up. I think time's up, or can I keep? Time's up. Time.
So now we have a little bit of Q&A until 12:30, right?
You can go a little bit over.
Okay, we're a little bit over. So I'm going to easily connect the two topics you just saw. First, let's get everyone on the stage, as it is. And we need to get microphones over. I'm just going to try to ask like a question or two to try to connect these very easily relatable things. And then I think we'll open up to the audience and we'll see what interesting questions everyone has here. Do I take this microphone? Is this mine? It's mine now. Oh, it's wireless. Oh my God, I'm like Britney Spears or something. But no one talks about Britney. That's dated now. I have a question for the CSGO guys, and then I think I have a question for David. So first, Shawn and Sal. David talked about possibility spaces a lot, and how, and especially Conway's, and he talked about that number line, 0 and 1, and you chop it up into infinitesimal. There's rational numbers, and there's an infinite number of rational numbers. Would you characterize a CSGO map as maybe a space of 6 rational bomb planting sites, and then there's an infinite number of irrational camping bomb sites? Was that good? I don't know. Did that make sense or no? What would you say to that?
I guess for every good play, there's a bad play. So I don't know.
Or
if
talk
that
about
makes sense.
possibility spaces and how do you create possibility spaces maybe?
I had an idea because Sal and I actually released a project that maybe didn't go as well as we were hoping. So now we're going back and we're gonna say, well, let's fix it and let's make changes. So we actually have a lot of stuff in the level that we're gonna probably get rid of now as part of a process of tailoring it. So those were maybe possibility spaces that we said, just functionally it's just not working for us.
What makes a bad possibility space?
For the map we're talking about, it's mostly focused outdoors, and the problem spaces we noticed were the indoor areas. They just didn't fit in right with the rest of the level.
Okay. David, what makes a good or bad possibility space in your mind? Or is that a faulty notion, and is this a bad question?
Oh, sorry. Good or bad? Yeah, I don't think it's faulty, but I think that it's the good or bad questions is a sort of moment-to-moment thing. But I like that the maximizing dimensionality idea, because I think that's something I like in a possibility space. If I feel like this is possible here, and I want to get over there, because there's even more that's possible over there. Like if you're going hiking and you see a big tall mountain and you want to climb the mountain, that's great because you can see a lot of things.
But then you see the mountain is unclimbable and it's a sheer cliff face, and then the possibility space suddenly shrinks or something, right? And you get really sad or something.
Well, maybe that's good too, because I think that it gets you amped up. You gotta, because I'm not totally against competition and things. I think it's conflict like that is pretty fun.
Okay.
Maybe
I really don't have much else. That was the one line I had. Let's open up to questions. How about that? Yay. We really like audience participation here at Practice.
You guys can share.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Hi. Is this on? Is it on? Hi, Celia Pierce from Northeastern. I have two things for the CSGO guys. One is a comment. I used to work in the theme park industry, and this whole thing about the radio tower, the technical term for that in the theme park industry is a weenie, just so you know. I also thought it was really interesting, the contrast between the very political and sort of critical thinking in the second talk, and I kept noticing things like, it's in the Middle East, it's in the Middle East, it's in the Middle East. And I was wondering if you guys had any kind of political, social critique of the work you're doing relevant to the scenes in which these combat scenarios are taking place.
Okay, so two things. When the project didn't go so well, some of the Valve guys actually recommended a book about Disney design, and so it's really weird. I just read that book, so it's really cool. About the political stuff, we released the map in Spain, and so I'm very ignorant, and I just was like, that looks cool. So then I was like, okay, well, we'll have the map be in Barcelona. Now, apparently, I don't know a lot about this, but apparently Barcelona is trying to separate from Spain. So I also think Spanish flags look really cool. So I was littering those throughout the map, and of course that was a disaster. So. But yeah, that's hopefully that addresses your question.
I mean, can I jump in on that real quick? Because here's the thing that makes me want to connect these two talks is in response to that question. To me, it's always been amazing that there's a generation of kids who grew up like the terrorist is in some ways the kind of political mythological figure of the contemporary of contemporary life. The terrorist, right? Especially after 9/11. There's a generation of people who grow up, their experience of terrorism is Counter-Strike. A game in which the terrorists and the counter-terrorists are like the Mets and the Yankees. They're two sides of an asymmetrical system that are like black and white in chess. And I don't know what that means politically. I don't know if it gives me hope that there's something kind of beautiful about that, or it makes me cynical. But I think mostly it gives me hope, right? That there's a way of defusing the kind of opposition of the terrorist other, because 12,000 hours a day, a terrorist is just one side of a two-sided coin in this strange kind of system. So I don't know what that means politically, but I find it really beautiful.
Second question. I guess I can ask a question. Yeah. Okay. Here. Well, speaking about Gibson and ecology, so psychology. I'm wondering how Counter-Strike, with such a restrained field of view, and how maps are designed according to this field of view, how, like, for example, Oculus Rift, which kind of like gives you a bigger scope or a bigger field of view, how this might change Counter-Strike and maps and map design or level design in general, and even like mapping of the mouse and etc.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. To me, the bigger concern with Oculus Rift would be the input system, because as a competitive player, I would have a hard time, I think, having fun using VR instead of a mouse and keyboard. But the field of view, that's actually a concern even going on now with like a 4:3 resolution to 16:9. You can actually see slightly more on 16:9, and that would be, I guess, exaggerated even more with an Oculus Rift. It does give you an advantage. You could see more out of the peripherals, and it would help you being aware of players behind you. So, yeah, that's a concern for sure that they would have to come up with. I'm not sure if it'd be on the level design, if that would be on us, or if it'd be on the game design. I suspect it'd probably be on the game design, though.
Okay, thanks.
So I thought during the Counter-Strike level talk something interesting about like the duality between like designing for the mechanics and like the competition versus also trying to bring like a little bit of narrative and aesthetics into it, and how those can be a push and pull. And I was thinking about it more again later with the duality thing. And I've always found it interesting that esports still have like narrative elements in them. Like if you play on a League of Legends map, like it takes place in a forest and there is a dragon, but basketball doesn't have forests and dragons painted on the court, right? So I was wondering if what value you guys feel, like how much of that is just like, you know, like a vestigial organ of it evolving out of a single player game, and how much of that is actually still bringing value to like the experience of playing Counter-Strike?
I mean, on the competitive level, it might not be so important, because if you've played Quake, the levels are just in some completely abstract location that is not relatable to anything in real life. But with Counter-Strike, we're trying to create levels that appeal to both, you know, the casual demographic and also the competitive demographic. And I think by having relatable spaces, it does help the casual players. And eventually, if they like the game enough, they're going to move on to the competitive side. Yeah, so I think that's basically it for me.
Oh, Mike, can we get a mic up here?
Hi. All right. So I was just thinking about this. The way that I like to link these two talks is that one slide that you showed of stacking in Counter-Strike.
Oh, great slide.
I'm sure, Sal, you're familiar with it, and maybe you as well, of the pub masters from way back in the day. So for everyone else's knowledge, the pub masters basically were a clan of professional Counter-Strike players or semi-professional Counter-Strike players who took the sort of the funkiness of pub play, so like non-professional play, and brought it into a professional setting where they would come up with all these zany ways to try to compete and play a match. So they would do like ridiculous stacks like that, or they would play matches where they only use their knife, or they would play grenades, but they managed to still compete while doing that. So I'm sure they were like, you know, they might not have been the best, but they had been pretty good to hold their own. But how do you, I guess it's a conversation about like building for player expression. And you talk about like, you know, the pub masters took this thing that felt very formalist and they broke it down and they sort of exposed it and made it a little absurd, and in some ways showed that was like their expression of beautiful play in that system. And I don't know, do you guys think about that when you're building your levels? Because obviously in some ways the reason it's beautiful is because it's a rejection of the sort of order that you're talking about, like some way like the Mario 64 runners who will pop a one-up mushroom and then run away from it. But anyways, yeah.
I can't say that I've thought about it too much in level design, but I am familiar with the pub masters, and they're hilarious. They're like the Harlem Globetrotters of CS, I guess. I'm not sure how much room there is to do that in Counter-Strike Go. I know in 1.6 and 1.5 you could stack on like endless players' heads and things like that. The closest I can think to that is in Counter-Strike Source, and I think even in Go it might still be in. If you get on top of your teammate's head and you both run at the same time, and the person on top jumps, he goes like 1,000 miles per hour. So I guess you could consider that in your level design. I know on Nuke people used to do it on the roof. They could jump 1,000 miles in the air and like swerve all the way and flank the CT spawn in a matter of a few seconds. And the map design allowed for that, but no, we haven't given that thought in our levels.
Oh, Eric has a question.
I wanted to also try and connect the talks. I mean, it's really, I mean, practice is just trying with this amazing, interesting, weird pairing. So this was definitely sort of like an odd couple thing. But it strikes me that, David, when you're talking about managing a house and economics and the kind of the tension between the sort of mathematical management, but then also the weird, playful, irrational things that just happen, or the ways of framing the same things. I mean, level design, it's like you're literally building a house, right? I mean, it's outdoor and indoor, but you're literally building houses or rooms or spaces. You're managing that space. Then in Counter-Strike, players are also managing that space, right? They are trying to figure out where they are, how they can keep their sight lines, how they can know where their opponents are, push forward, gather information, use that information. So I guess, David, I wanted to ask you, if we think about the Counter-Strike, and you guys talked about aesthetics and truth and readability, visibility, a lot of things that echoed in your talk, David. I mean, if we use the Counter-Strike as a case study for the kinds of ideas that you're talking about, like how can we integrate those ideas into design? Am I correct in the sort of the kind of parallel that I'm making? Can we see level design as a kind of house? You're talking about something more abstract or something more specific. So I just want to draw a few more lines of connection here.
Yeah, well, yeah, the level design is definitely a house. I just learned how to do level design in Unity, which I wanted to show. I make very stupid houses. But yeah, definitely house, definitely management thing. And I think the question of how do you integrate the sort of classic formalism, which I believe is trying to amplify the qualities of a good competitive space that creates, I think, a collaboration between the competitors. I don't know if that's something that it's a competition, but like if you're a competitor, you want to compete against a competitor that's a good competitor. You don't want to compete against someone who's crappy because it's like a dialogue. Is that make?
Yeah. No, that's true. I mean, you always want to play versus people on your skill level or better.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you don't really get anything from it.
Yeah.
It's not fun for either side.
Yeah, right, sort of like harmonize with them. So yeah, I don't know, that's something that I really value, and often when I play competitive games, I just get totally owned by my competitors. Not that fun. Probably not that fun for them either. But I am fascinated by how the ideal of competition, and this is something, when I bring up the economic thing, I think that not that fun is happening on a big scale in terms of the actual economic relations between people that don't have enough food to eat, and or that have enough food, but it's like before I got money from Proteus, I just eat eggs and beans every day, which was pretty cool. But you can make do. But in the U.S. welfare system, I think you're off after 5 years if you don't get a job, and there's all kinds of. So I'm kind of worried about the enforced competition that says you got to compete, you got no other choice. But the voluntary competition, I think, is a very beautiful thing. And I would love to be able to take lessons from that. And I think in your guys' maps, when you show these, I forgot what the names of the points that you'd circled on maps, and a lot of the different concepts that you're talking about, relationship between form and function, are identifying structural things that I think transcend the competition in a way. By bringing out the best in the competition, that becomes something more. It becomes a kind of dialogue. I don't know if this is a very good answer to the question because I'm kind of crappy at competition games, so I don't. Yeah.
Yeah, I think what you're saying makes sense. Like, voluntary competition does do something for the human spirit. I think is very healthy. I don't think you should, take it to an extreme in other areas of life.
Right.
Can we get my here,
So if I could connect Jonathan Blow's talk previously and the Counter-Strike talk, I have a slight dissonance in my mind because the lesson I took away from Jonathan's talk was do not be afraid to leave players behind. The lesson I take away from your talk is basically don't get in the way of the players in design. So it is a slight dissonance in that I guess Counter-Strike, the audience specifically you're going for, is so highly optimized, you don't want to get in their way. Whatever you do, you don't get in their way, whereas the lesson that I get from Jonathan is, essentially, you have sort of vision that you want to follow, which may leave players behind, or which may make players work hard to essentially follow with you and so on. So is there a resolution to that sort of dilemma?
I think the resolution comes on the timeline. So now Counter-Strike didn't arise out of a vacuum. Somebody had to design the game. And so Counter-Strike has there's a $16,000 money limit. It's completely arbitrary. But, is a vision somebody had, it was actually two people, said, we're going to go and we're going to design this game. So now I think the game is in such a polished state that it's maybe like one of John's games after 5 years where you don't go back and tweak it because it's already really a well-realized vision of a game. But maybe for his next game, he says, well, I'm going to throw out all of that, and I'm going to do something totally new.
Hi. So I have another a possible connection to draw, which is that you're right, David, in saying that formalism has kind of been on the defense, but in games right now, sort of enumeration of game spaces and especially like level design type spaces are becoming more and more susceptible to procedural techniques. So do you think that that could be a comeback, like enumeration as a design style for formalism? And
What's
have you
enumerate?
guys
Sorry.
considered, procedural generation and what that, how that sort of conflicts and also harmonizes with the sort of very handmade artistic style of level design?
For Counter-Strike, I don't know if procedural generation would work. So you mean like every time you load the game, you're playing on a new level, or would the levels always be procedurally generated and then saved?
You could procedurally generate them beforehand or whatever.
It's like a Diablo dungeon, it's kind of random. I don't think that would work for Counter-Strike because, like Shawn said, the game's been played for so long. A lot of these maps have been played for so long. A lot of the skill is knowing the map inside and out, every trick you can do on it. And I don't think you could get to that with a new level, a procedural level. Every time you join, you have it would be a new skill, but I don't think it'd be one that Counter-Strike fans would appreciate. But maybe another game down the line, I think it could work for sure.
And enumeration, I just mean like knowing the boundaries of the possibility space.
Okay, yeah, and having a lot of different... Yeah, I love some procedural stuff. I think what I love about the procedural stuff is often what's hand-picked about it, because you got to pick the process that you're using, and you got to pick all these things that are...
You're making panoramical.
Yeah, panoramical, which is procedural, kind of, but it's like kind of not. I don't know how to answer. I like the procedural stuff. I think it's like a object in a toolkit that is good to use. Is that...
I wanted to say something very much in line with that, which was sort of connecting both these talks and maybe John's talk as well, is that, there's John's talk about a 20-year design project means that he's going to be moving through a whole bunch of tool sets and a whole bunch of different even fashion systems of what games are about and things like that. And that's an iterative process, but that iterative process that's pointing at a set of patterns, and I think that's maybe the relationship that you're sort of going for in the forces, the organic lenses and the mechanical lenses, right? There are these sort of things that are happening that are patterns, like when the dragons fall away in League of Legends, there's still a thing there, which is a system, that we're sort of beginning to understand. And I feel like that's the interesting phase for Counter-Strike right now, is it's in this, that thing has been fully recognized, and now it's like the infinitesimal, it's the irrational numbers in between, which are the little differences, like, okay, we know what the big system looks like, but what are the little tiny differences that were in the little fractal, pathways, almost like on John's diagram of the known and the unknown. There's like this, very higher and higher resolution little set of paths that you're going down towards the target, and so I feel like that's maybe partially what you're sort of describing there are some things that we're bringing with us through all these iterations or enumerations, I think he was saying, and that's like so there's it's interesting that there's this one space of the highly, you guys now have a language to talk about the differences between Dust and the new map, and that's like, but that's such a small space in the overall design project of all the patterns of games. So it's interesting that you're sort of, zooming way out. Zooming out to the process of zooming out.
Yeah, I think the pattern thing I think is important, because I think that's like the logic or metaphysical thing almost. It's like everything physical is pattern, so pattern is metaphysical in like a non-trivial sense, I think. But yeah, and then thinking about it more with the procedural stuff and patterns, like I think the thing with a procedural, a non-procedural pattern, like a beat that's just boom, 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 is a constant. And then procedural things can introduce a variable into that pattern. And in general, I'm more interested in handing a free variable over to a player as opposed to a random number generator, which is another kind of player, but one who doesn't have as much flesh as we do. But yeah, I don't know if that, but the pattern thing I think is key, and it's like we got patterns, we got constants, we got variables. What are we gonna do with those? And I don't know.
And I think that is like a good connection to actually. Counter-Strike is a 20-year project. Margaret Thatcher neoliberalism is a 20-year project. Forever project. Okay, let's end it. You're right. I think this idea of like time, and when we stretch time like that, it allows details and nuances to come out, and then there's a beautiful wetness to those details and nuances with Counter-Strike Go, or with giving variables to the players, right? Giving them control to talk back. How much time do we have? Okay. Give it up for our lovely panelists.
And thanks, Robert. Let's give it up for Robert for hosting this amazing panel. Yeah.